Greetings and peace. I would like to start this with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Peace be with you and yours. Today's presentation, I would like to talk about Arabic Freemasonry, which is the original Eastern Freemasonry, pre-1717 model, and how the Arabic, the Bedouin, the Berber, and the indigenous tribes of the Middle East practiced this craft before the so-called 1717 origin story. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy this, and I represent myself only. This presentation is produced strictly for entertainment, fair use, educational, and nonprofit purposes. It does not endorse, promote, recruit for, or encourage membership in any fraternal, religious, political, or initiatic organization. The material presented is historical and analytical. The objective is scholarly examination of Dr. H.R. Coleman's documented account of modern Arabian Freemasonry. Viewers are encouraged to extract ethical and philosophical insights only, applying them constructively within their own lives. And I encourage you all to check out the Islam, Sufism, and Freemasonry playlist on my YouTube channel for all of the works related to this subject matter. Dr. H.R. Coleman provides one of the most detailed 19th century testimonies describing a living Arab Masonic tradition operating independently of English Grand Lodge structures. Unlike speculative theorists, Coleman claimed direct initiation, ritual participation, and administrative involvement within what he described as an ongoing Arabian system of Masonry. The Oriental Order of the Palm and Shell, sometimes associated with the Pilgrim Knights, was a Masonic society devoted to travel in the East in pursuit of what its members believed were deeper Masonic truths. Part of its vision was the establishment of a Masonic lodge in Jerusalem, reflecting a symbolic and spiritual connection to the Holy Land. The group also hoped to foster closer ties between Eastern and Western branches of Freemasonry. The organization is described in an 1879 guide written by Reverend Henry R. Coleman, an American Episcopal clergyman and Masonic author known for documenting fraternal orders and their histories in the 19th century. And this is what Coleman points out, is that we're told to travel to the East for light. But in the Western Masonic 1717 narrative, only the English are given the credit for that, and that's what is deconstructed here. Between 1879 and 1880, Coleman traveled in the Holy Land where he encountered what he described as Arab Masonry among certain tribes. He reported being initiated in the cave of Jeremiah near Jerusalem by a sheikh, after proving moral worthiness. By 1883, while in Damascus, he was recognized by local Arab Masons and requested to confer degrees, demonstrating not myth but active organizational structure and recognition. Coleman described his initiation as conducted according to ancient ritual preserved among Arab brethren. The location, Jerusalem, near the cave of Jeremiah, symbolically ties the rite to biblical temple geography rather than Enlightenment Europe. The initiation reportedly included sacrificial symbolism, covenantal obligation, and oral instruction consistent with Near Eastern ritual culture. Coleman later served as Supreme Chancellor of the Oriental Order of Pilgrim Knights under Francis Ferdinand Adi of Cairo, identified as Supreme Chief. This indicates a hierarchical yet transnational structure linking Cairo, the Levant, and eventually America, demonstrating continuity across both hemispheres. This is very similar to the Order of Ishmael as well, in terms of how it's all laid out. Coleman reported that Arab Masonry did not emphasize the Hiramic legend central to English craft masonry, instead attributing direct foundation to King Solomon. The Arabs reportedly recognized signs similar to modern degrees, but lacked certain later European grips, suggesting preservation of a variant or earlier stratum. Instruction was delivered entirely by word of mouth. No printed ritual books governed proceedings. Knowledge was transmitted through memory, mentorship, and oath-bound confidentiality. This oral mode explains why bureaucratic documentation is scarce, while lived practice persisted among tribes and urban centers alike. Coleman's encounters occurred in Jerusalem and Damascus, with references to Cairo as a governing center. He also described Arab Masons across tribal regions and Bedouin communities. The system was described as existing in both hemispheres by the late 19th century, implying diaspora transmission beyond the Middle East. In Damascus, a local sheikh informed Coleman that 5 candidates awaited initiation. Despite language barriers, he conferred degrees with translation assistance, and Arab brethren affirmed ritual correctness. This episode demonstrates operational continuity, candidate preparation, hierarchical recognition, and ceremonial validation. Coleman reported that among Bedouin Arabs, fathers raised sons within Masonic ethical frameworks from infancy, formally initiating them upon reaching maturity. So this basically is like the whole demolay system that's inspired from this. And if we look at the Islamic culture of Fatuwa and chivalry, the Fatuwa brotherhoods and the chivalric system, which were also introduced into Europe, this indicates a hereditary ethical transmission model rather than lodge-based recruitment culture. Coleman emphasized that Arab Masons regarded their obligations as sacred beyond social contract. A brother was expected to risk life itself in defense of another. This intense ethical emphasis mirrors covenantal traditions deeply embedded in Near Eastern spiritual culture. And these are the real deal Masons and not the scumbags that we have today, pretending to be as such. According to the Arab narrative, Solomon empowered worthy Masons to initiate others based on moral qualification. Authority traveled with character, not institutional charter or recognition. This decentralized model allowed diffusion across Egypt, India, and Europe through traveling artisans and traders. Francis Ferdinand Adi of Cairo was identified as supreme chief in Coleman's time, indicating Egypt as an administrative nexus of the Oriental Order. Cairo's historical role as intellectual and commercial crossroads makes it a plausible center for preservation and coordination. Coleman stated Arab Masonry closely resembled Druze initiatic organization, except for additional obligations required of outsiders. This suggests regional esoteric ecosystems where graded secrecy and moral vetting were standard practice. Coleman distinguished Arab Masonry from Dervish and other Islamic mystical orders, though structural parallels exist. This differentiation indicates self-awareness of identity rather than confusion with generic Sufi fraternities. The Mediterranean Pass and related testimony demonstrate recognition across Christian, Muslim, and Jewish boundaries, supporting Coleman's depiction of trans-sectarian functionality. Such recognition mechanisms enabled safe passage and diplomatic interaction in volatile medieval and Ottoman context. So these were Moorish Muslim Masons who were initiating the Knights Templars and the Knights of Malta and these other people, right, in the ancient systems where they would be able to pass through the lands and the seas unmolested without any issue with the signs, grips, and tokens. So the Mediterranean Pass, I've covered this in a previous video, and I will cover it briefly in this presentation as well, which also deconstructs the 1717 English narrative, right? Where it's interesting, these people, right, the English, if you go to the British Museum, are they the central authority of history and archaeology? No, because they stole that from everywhere. Are they the central authority for these initiatic systems? No, because it was already existed before them, as you have seen in my previous works and in this presentation as well. But, the nerve of them calling other systems fringe masonry. But I'm happy in today's society, all of the lies and the deception that we got put through in the schools and the history and the teachings, it's all being deconstructed and people see everything for what it is. Coleman's writings assert that Arab Masonry was active in the late 19th century across the Levant and Egypt, not merely as historical memory, but living practice. This challenges the narrative that all legitimate Masonry derived solely from English Grand Lodge lineage. By introducing the Oriental Order into America, Coleman claimed extension of this Arabian current into the Western Hemisphere. This suggests a conscious attempt to preserve and transmit what he believed to be a more ancient rite. Coleman was not an outside critic but a participating Mason. His account emerges from within Masonic culture, lending internal historiographical significance. While critical scrutiny is necessary, dismissal without examination reflects narrative bias rather than scholarship. If Coleman's accounts reflect genuine continuity, then Freemasonry's development must be understood within a Mediterranean and Middle Eastern matrix. This does not negate European codification, but situates it within a broader civilization exchange. Coleman's testimony situates modern Arabian Freemasonry in Jerusalem, Damascus, Cairo, Bedouin tribes, and the diasporic transmission into America during the late 19th century. Whether preserved in identical form today or transformed through time, his record demands that the Middle Eastern dimension of Masonry be taken seriously in scholarly discourse. The scope and thesis of this argument cannot be stressed enough, and we look at this presentation and how it examines modern Arabian Freemasonry as described in early 20th century and 19th century testimonies, situating it within a broader initiatic continuum that predates the 1717 English Grand Lodge narrative. It integrates accounts of Arab rites, the Mediterranean Pass, and Islamic initiatic brotherhoods to challenge narrow historical framing. The central thesis argues that Freemasonry did not emerge suddenly in an isolated European vacuum. Rather, it reflects layered transmission across the Mediterranean world, shaped by Islamic civilization, Near Eastern symbolism, chivalric exchange, and older Abrahamic traditions. According to early American Masonic publications, Dr. H.R. Coleman introduced into America the Oriental Order of Pilgrim Knights after contact with Arab Masonry in the Holy Land during 1879 through 1880. He reported being initiated by an Arab sheikh in the cave of Jeremiah near Jerusalem after proving himself worthy. Coleman translated a ritual he claimed was in continuous use among certain Arab rites. Until the First World War, he served as Supreme Chancellor under Francis Ferdinand Odeh of Cairo. His testimony presents Arab Masonry as living, functional, and transnational, and it still exists today. Arab Masonic tradition, as recorded by Coleman, holds that King Solomon himself made masons of his workmen during preparation for the First Temple. According to this account, Masonry originated not in medieval guilds, but directly in sacred temple construction under prophetic authority. The narrative includes the forging of 3 cubic metal squares from meteoric iron said to have fallen at Solomon's birth. These sacred tools were employed ritually, linking heavenly descent, sacred geometry, and covenantal obligation in a single mythic symbolic framework. So the Arabs don't have the Hiramic legend or the story of Hiram Abiff from the third degree. They directly link their founding to Prophet Suleiman, peace be upon him, King Solomon. The Arab account describes Solomon sacrificing a sheep in the ancient Hebrew manner while instructing newly obligated brothers. The symbolism emphasized that betrayal of vows would invite divine wrath comparable to the ritual penalties enacted upon the sacrificial animal. This reflects a covenantal understanding of obligation rooted in Near Eastern ritual culture. Masonry here appears not as abstract philosophy, but as embodied ethical commitment reinforced through solemn dramatic enactment. Following completion of the temple, Solomon allegedly empowered worthy Masons to travel freely and initiate others who met moral requirements. Authority was decentralized, yet bound to ethical qualification rather than institutional bureaucracy. In this telling, Masonry spread organically across Egypt, India, Europe, and beyond, not as a guild monopoly, but as a moral fraternity, transmitted father to son and master to initiate. So basically, it was a system of morality, but without that institutional, bureaucratic Grand Lodge and Lodge system, which I myself don't personally believe in. So this model is actually more attractive. Coleman reported that Arab Masons were unfamiliar with the Hiramic legend central to later European craft masonry. They attributed foundational authority solely to Solomon rather than to Hiram of Tyre. This divergence suggests that either an earlier stratum of tradition or an alternative transmission stream that developed independently of later English ritual standardization. But this system is older and more ancient than the English system. Arab Masonry reportedly recognized signs corresponding to the three modern degrees, but lacked certain features such as the master's grip. Instruction was delivered orally, preserving secrecy through memory rather than written documentation. Such oral transmission aligns with ancient initiatic systems in which knowledge is embodied and lived, not bureaucratically archived, an important factor when evaluating claims of no written proof. Among the Bedouin Arabs, fathers reportedly reared their sons in Masonic ethics from childhood, introducing them formally only upon reaching maturity. The emphasis lays on loyalty, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to brotherhood. Coleman stated that an Arab Mason was prepared literally to lay down his life for a brother, viewing obligation as sacred beyond ordinary social contracts. While in Damascus, Coleman was reportedly asked by a local sheikh to confer degrees upon 5 candidates. Due to language limitations, he spoke English while a lawyer translated into Arabic, and the Arab brethren declared the ceremony perfect. 2 candidates were said to be direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, reinforcing that claim that initiatic continuity operated comfortably within Islamic genealogical frameworks. Coleman considered Arab Masonry closely aligned with Druze structures, except for additional obligations required of non-Druze candidates. This suggests graded inclusivity within Islamic esoteric communities. Islamic Fatwa brotherhoods likewise combine graded instruction, moral chivalry, secrecy, and symbolic labor, the structural parallels that complicate simplistic European origin narratives. The Mediterranean Pass functioned as a recognition mechanism among Knights Templar and later Knights of Malta, ensuring safe passage across territories governed by Muslims, Jews, and Christians alike. Primary 19th century testimony describes it as evidence of brotherly recognition, transcending sectarian boundaries, demonstrating an initiatic language operating across religious frontiers. Now, Brother L.C. Delude, who wrote in the Freemasons Quarterly Review from the United Grand Lodge of England, 2nd Series, 1846, explicitly in an English Grand Lodge source, identifies the Mediterranean Pass as evidence of brotherly recognition between Christian, Turk, Moor, and Jew, an English Grand Lodge source recognizing a pre-1717 model, which already had signs, grips, and tokens. So basically, the concept of the pre-1717 Masonry is that what we see here in the Arab Freemasonry is that there was no Hiramic legend. The 3rd degree in the Hiramic legend was added later, and this initiatic system of the signs, grips, and tokens, and secrecy, and initiatic systems, and brotherly love that already existed in the Near East, right? So it's like what I say. Is the British Museum the supreme authority of history and archaeology? No, because they stole it from everywhere else. Is the United Grand Lodge of England the supreme authority of Masonry? No, because that existed in the East before anywhere else. And we see that recurring theme, right? Whether it's the Rosicrucian system, Christian Rosencreutz went to the Near East and got initiated by the Sufis, Crowley with the Sufis, Aleister Crowley and the Sufis, Freemasonry, the Knights Templars, with the Ismaili Shias, the Hashashin. The East is never given any credit, that's the issue. And then you have the nerve of these people calling these other systems fringe masonry. It is not. Here we have Brother L.C. Delude in the Freemasons Quarterly Review, 1846, second edition, from the Grand Lodge of England, who's specifically mentioning and giving credit to the Mediterranean past Masonic degree, which was given to the Knights Templars, the Knights of Malta, by Muslim Moorish Masons, right? Which was, they were given signs and grips and tokens, which would help them cross that area unmolested, right? And basically this ancient initiatic system and brotherhood existed way before 1717. And here in an English Grand Lodge source, it is being given credit. And please check out the previous video that I've done on this subject as well. Now we look at Frederick II of Prussia, also known as Frederick the Great. He played a foundational role in formalizing the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite in the 18th century. He was not just a monarch, but a philosopher king, deeply interested in mysticism and Masonic ideals. Under his influence, the Scottish Rite became a vessel for the esoteric teachings of the Knights Templar, and he is credited with safeguarding their deeper secrets within the structure of the 33 degrees. Frederick's vision was not about ritual for ritual's sake. It was about preserving light through dark times. And for those in the Philadelphia area, the King of Prussia area is named after him. In the 33rd and final degree of the Scottish Rite, the initiate is given a shocking revelation that he is symbolically the spiritual descendant of the true Knights Templar. He is instructed to uphold the legacy of Jacques de Molay and to swear a spiritual vengeance against the historical enemies of the Templars, namely the Knights of Malta. This vengeance is not one of violence, but of remembrance and truth-telling. The candidate learns the truth that was buried by the Church, that the Templars carried hidden knowledge from the East, safeguarded by mystics, Sufis, and Moors. And the Scottish Rite is basically the true pinnacle of that light, where if you look at it from that perspective, the Knights Templar survived, they fled to Scotland, hence the Scottish Rite, and the true identity of them being preserved in the 33rd degree at the highest pinnacle of the Scottish Rite. And if you look at the hats, they have the Templar cross and the hat, and the responsibility that is given to that rank. And most people say that that's given to those that deserve it, but in my opinion, I've seen it given to those people that don't deserve it at all, right? Either they were friends with the higher-ups, or they had enough political pull, or they were involved in finance or lawyers, or they were friends with the higher-ups. So Freemasonry of today, it's the Grand Lodge and Lodge system. It's not what it's supposed to be. And that's why I say that take the teachings and apply them to your life, and you don't want to get involved with that world and the energy that it brings into your life. And especially you look at today's world, where you have to be a scumbag and psychopath to be able to get ahead in today's world. So you don't want to be involved in that in any way. So just take the teachings and apply it to your life. So that's the truth about that and the Scottish Rite, and just basically applying those teachings to your life and knowing the identity. Now, most people would say that, okay, the vengeance against the Knights of Malta, it's symbolic. But in some instances, it's on sight. So if you know, you know. The Knights Templar were also accused of being Muslim and worshipping Muhammad, the Prophet, peace be upon him, in secret. Now, most people do not know about this artifact, a Templar cross, right, with the image of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which you're not supposed to do, which was found in a Knights Templar church in Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, right, Turkey. And that's basically it. They were mixing with the Hashashin, the Ismaili Shias, right, the Sufis, the mystics, taking that and incorporating that mysticism and knowledge and taking it back to Europe. And they were sympathetic towards Islam and Muslims. So all these ignoramuses in the Knights Templars Facebook groups and these other places who have this bias against Islam and the East, right, the true Knights Templar were not like that. Because what Baphomet even represents, right? Baphomet is that basically that combination of the divine masculine and feminine combined in one. which they were attributing to Muhammad, peace be upon him, the Insan al-Kamil, the perfect human being, solved, dissolved, feminine, masculine, and all of that in between. So the people who use the Templar crosses or the Deuce Volt and all of that nonsense, it's go F yourself. You're not even worth the hair on the nuts of the true Templars or the true Hashashin. There was an Arabization of the Knights Templars, right? The charges against them accused them of being crypto-Muslim with worshipping of Baphomet, which was a bastardization of Mahomet, and the denial of Christ, as I've explained in the previous slide. And they were persecuted on a Friday, which is a holy day for Islam and Muslims. The Knights Templars made treaties in the Holy Land with the Muslims contrary to French interests, and betraying Frankish armies to Muslims during periods of conflicts. And they even allowed Muslims to pray in Al-Aqsa Mosque during their occupation. Robert of St. Albans, he was an English Knights Templar who converted to Islam and married Saladin's niece. In the 1270s, the Templar commander in Sidon, Matthew Sauvage, also spelled Sermaj, and the Mamluk ruler of Egypt, Sultan Berbers, were blood brothers. Hugues de Paynes, the co-founder and first Grand Master of the Knights Templar, was a descendant of Moorish Sufis. And if you look at the Pagani family crest of Sicily, he comes from that, and you see the heads of 3 Moors on the family crest. And his grandfather was a Moorish Sufi who had instructed him into the mysteries. So that connection, that Islamic connection with the Knights Templars and what we know as Freemasonry today, it's there and it cannot be denied. Even what we see with the Arab Freemasonry being covered in this presentation. Here is a news clipping from the London Evening News, September 3rd, 1918, which many sources have tried to wipe this information from the internet, but thankfully this news clipping is preserved in the book, The Secret Sects of Syria and Lebanon, which came out in the early 1900s. So the documents and books from the 1800s and early 1900s preserves a lot of this material, right? Where the modern Masonic gatekeepers, they dare not mention this stuff, nor mention the East in any way. But, I've always covered this in my presentations, and I showed you an English Grand Lodge source, which mentions the Mediterranean Pass Masonic degree, a pre-1717 model. Now, this news clipping specifically reads as follows. Freemasons in Palestine, they're mentioning Palestine before the so-called state that we know that was created in 1948. This is being mentioned in 1918. So Freemasons in Palestine have held a Masonic meeting on the historic site of King Solomon's Temple, where Freemasonry is supposed to have originated about 1000 BC. Now you'll see the Arab connection, right? Where H.R. Coleman was also initiated in this same aspect. This meeting was organized by members of the New Zealand Expeditionary Force in Palestine, the Mosque of Umar being on the site of the temple. The New Zealanders approached the great sheikh in charge of the mosque for permission. Then occurred an incident showing the universality of the order. The sheikh listened to what the strangers had to say, and then to their amazement, he asked if there were any Masons among them. The rest was easy. He declared himself a Mason, and at the meeting he acted as one of the guards of the lodge. The place within the mosque where the meeting was held is known as the Cave of the Rock of the Dome, and is believed to have been the Holy of Holies of the Old Temple, as it is today the Mosque of Umar. Soldiers of all ranks were present, and after a lodge had been duly constituted and opened, resolutions were passed, conveying fraternal greetings and good wishes to the various Grand Lodges, to the lodges in New Zealand, and the brethren on service in France. And this ancient brotherhood goes way back, even to the times of Richard and Saladin, where they would exchange each other, right? Greet each other with the lion's grip, Richard the Lionheart, and they would come to each other's aid when needed. Like in different sides of the conflict, the American Civil War, the World Wars, brothers would be on the opposite sides of the conflict. So this is exactly portrayed here in a beautiful way also. We also see that the Knights Templars interacted very deeply with the Islamic Shia Hashashin, right? The Nizari Ismaili Shias. And we look at the degree system, it's pretty much one and the same, right? We look at the Ismailis, the first degree system they have, the Grand Master or the Prince of the Mountain or the Old Man of the Mountain, the Dais al-Kabir, the three great viceroys under him, the Dais or provincial masters, the Rafiq or chaplains, the Lazik or military body, the Farains or death devoted, and the Batini or the secret brethren affiliates. Look at the Knights Templar, the Grand Master, the three Grand Priors, the provincial prior, the chaplains, the knights, the esquires, the serving brethren, the Donato and Obligati, and the Affiliati, and both wore red and white. If you look at the Hashashin and the Knights Templar uniform, right, you wouldn't know who was coming at you at that time. Christian degrees often employed Christian terminology while operating through universal ethical structures. Form and theology were distinct from function and initiatic method. Such dual expression mirrors Islamic esoteric traditions, where outer language may be sectarian while inner symbolism remains philosophically universal. Islamic civilization preserved and expanded geometry, astronomy, architecture, mathematics, and esoteric philosophy during Europe's medieval fragmentation. These sciences re-entered Europe via Spain, Sicily, and Crusader contact zones. Sacred geometry and architectural symbolism central to Freemasonry reflect this transmission environment rather than sudden invention in 18th century London, right? So Islamic presence in Spain and Al-Andalus in Andalusia brought Europe from darkness into the light, right? That was a society where all religions were persevering equally, where the Kabbalah was developed, where a lot of the arts and sciences were able to be preserved, where a lot of the ancient texts were translated and preserved. So the Islamic model of the Golden Age and civilization brings light to many different places. And many places today claiming any type of moral or religious supremacy, the Islamic model is always the most successful one, as we see in Spain. The Knights Templar operated for generations within the Levant, negotiating truces, alliances, and codes of honor with Muslim polities. Prolonged proximity enabled symbolic exchange beyond battlefield narratives. Recognition systems such as passwords and signs functioned diplomatically as well as ritually, forming plausible conduits for initiatic cross-pollination, as we see with H.R. Coleman, what he saw with the ancient Arab Freemasonry, and you see this even shown in the popular culture, right, in the John Wick movie, where the elder, the one who sits above the table, the descendant of the Hashashins, right, and he tells him, "My son, why have you been so lost from me?" As John Wick wanders from the west to the east in search of light, and then goes from the east back to the west, right, in order to preserve himself. So, and he's dressed as a Mason too, with a dark jacket, dark pants, white shirt, dark tie. So all of that is symbolically relative, and he crosses this hot sands, right, before collapsing and then coming to enlightenment, as the true Muslim Shriner would. The formation of the Grand Lodge of England in 1717 standardized administration, but did not create Masonry ex nihilo, which means out of nothing in Latin. Pre-existing traditions were reorganized, not invented. Earlier testimonies and continental practices demonstrate that the system's philosophical and symbolic core predates Enlightenment codification. And just like I said, if you go to the British Museum, they are not the supreme authority on history and archaeology, and the United Grand Lodge of England should not be considered the supreme authority or tracing the lineage back to this Grand Lodge as the supreme authority of Freemasonry. These initiatic systems and these teachings and brotherhoods existed way before them, right? And then the nerve of people, the Masonic gatekeepers of today, calling other systems fringe Masonry, should be ashamed, right? As free thinkers, we should give credit and love and adherence to everything that we see in pursuit of knowledge from cradle to grave. The suppression of the Templars in the early 14th century was driven by political and financial motives. Initiatic traditions historically migrate under pressure rather than disappear. Scotland and other peripheral regions may have functioned as continuity zones, preserving chivalric and initiatic narratives later embedded within higher degrees. The ancient and accepted Scottish rite culminates in explicitly chivalric symbolism, suggesting layered inheritance rather than pure Enlightenment invention. Temple imagery, sacred numerology, and cosmic architecture trace conceptual ancestry to the ancient Near East, transmitted through Islamic and Jewish intellectual corridors. The title, The Great Architect of the Universe, allows philosophical monotheism without sectarian limitation. It resonates naturally with Islamic and Jewish theological framing. Such terminology supports interfaith participation while preserving reverence, demonstrating adaptability rather than doctrinal rigidity. And basically, it's Tawheed. In Islamic terms, Tawheed is basically the belief in the Supreme Being, and that is a core requirement of Masonry as well, to have that belief in that one Supreme Creator. Initiatic systems traditionally transmit orally and symbolically. The absence of bureaucratic documentation is consistent with secrecy, not evidence of fabrication. Primary testimonies from 19th century Masons referencing Arab rites, as we see with H.R. Coleman, and Mediterranean recognition systems, carry historiographical weight precisely because they predate modern polemics. So we see Brother H.R. Coleman, right? He references the Arab rites in Freemasonry. We see Brother L.C. Delude, who specifically mentions the Pre-1717 Moorish Mason Mediterranean past Masonic degree. So this stuff existed way before. Keep in mind the goal of colonialism, imperialism, and racism was also to wipe out many of the indigenous peoples of the world and their teachings because they had transmitted orally. It was not written down. So these people that we have today, oh, you got to provide me a source. Well, what proof do you have? Do you have any evidence? Blah, 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 blah. Right? The Masonic gatekeepers that don't want to give the East any credit. And if you look hard enough, you will find it, right? Like we have the English Grand Lodge source with Brother L.C. Delude in the Freemasons Quarterly Review, 1846 second edition, and that Mediterranean past degree is mentioned. And check out my previous video on that and all of my videos in the Islam, Sufism, and Freemasonry playlist on my YouTube channel, which specifically dedicates to this subject matter. The evidence surveyed undermines claims that Freemasonry is an exclusively English or purely European invention. Instead, it reflects Mediterranean exchange shaped heavily by Islamic civilization. Civilizations advance through contact, adaptation, and synthesis. Freemasonry appears as a trans-civilizational heirloom refined in Europe, right? But rooted in older Near Eastern soil. Modern Arabian Freemasonry, as described in early testimonies, presents a living initiatic structure tied symbolically to King Solomon, Prophet Suleiman, peace be upon him, preserved through Arab brotherhoods and interacting historically with chivalric Europe. And the chivalry was also introduced by Islam into Europe. Whether interpreted as direct lineage or structured parallel, the Islamic and Mediterranean dimensions of Freemasonry demand serious scholarly consideration beyond inherited Eurocentric assumptions. Here are the sources that I have listed here, and I recommend that you basically check out Brother H.R. Coleman's work, and also check out the Freemasons Quarterly Review from L.C. Delude, which mentions the Pre-1717 model of the Mediterranean past degree. And please consider looking at all of these sources and teachings. And just an example, right? We have the Chinese gods, Nuwa and Fuxi, right? And it's like, it's a male and a female, right? In two separate heads, but connected to one body. One is holding the square and one is holding the compass, the Masonic square and compass, as they're recreating the world. So I don't have a specific bias for Islam or an axe to grind with Western esotericism. My problem is with the Masonic gatekeepers who don't want to give the East in general any credit. So all of this stuff comes from the East, the oldest civilizations, the oldest texts, right? The story of Gilgamesh, all of the fraternities and brotherhoods and societies and religions, it all comes from there. So they should be given their due credit and right. Thank you for watching. If any questions or comments, please email me at salmansheikh911@gmail.com. And of course, all my work is for the purpose of fair use under the copyright laws of fair use, education, nonprofit, free speech, education, and entertainment purposes. Thank you so much. All rights reserved.